Good day everyone. Our group will tackle the chapter 15, which is the women and violence. So for our objectives, we have three. At the end of this chapter, the students should be able to, number one, identify the various forms of violence against women. Number two, explain how even subtle forms of violence affect women. And number three, articulate ways to prevent violence against women. So, vow strikes at the personhood of women, says the Philippine Commission on Women. Violence against women is a specific form of violence that attacks persons at their core, which is their gender. It also has physical and emotional effects on women. Violence against women is one of the most taboo topics in feminism and has a long history of contention. So when we say taboo topics, these are the kind of topics in which they try to avoid to talk about that kind of subject because some people find them embarrassing or offensive. So the main reason that's why violence against women is not fully addressed is because it is a kind of topic that is considered as a hated disagreement. So there are two reasons for this disagreement. First, some people assume that gender-specific violence does not exist. And second, those who witness unrecognized violence against women view it as normal and unavoidable. Gender-specific violence is just a part of how the world is and there's nothing one can do to change it. So there are some people who view the violence against women as normal and it is already inevitable. It means that this kind of violence are already existing and it's part of how the world works. Data unearthed during the second wave of the Western world's feminist movement showed that domestic violence was systemic and prevalent. It was so widespread that women's shelters for victims of domestic violence were popularized during the 1960s. Defining violence against women. So, according to the Magna Carta of Women in the Philippines, they define vow as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private life. So, when we say coercion or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, it means that you persuade someone to do something by using force or threats. Types of violence against women. There are two umbrella terms for violence against women. These are sexual violence and physical violence. So sexual violence strikes when women are perceived to be biologically different from men, which also serves as basis for gender roles. So there are four types of violence as defined in the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Law of 2003. Number one is physical violence. Number two is psychological violence. Number three is economic abuse or violence. And number four is sexual violence. Physical violence. It is the most detectable form of vow. It involves causing physical or bodily harm against another person. So it is the most detectable form of vow because it is seen in the physical appearance of the victim. Next is psychological violence. Psychological force or violence involves causing harm to a victim through the use of emotional manipulation, resulting in mental suffering. Some forms of psychological violence include constant putting down of a woman, diminishing her value because of her socially constructed role, or judging how she acts or what she does. Repeated verbal abuse is also a form of this violence. The core of psychological force or violence lies in the idea that women are weaker and should be looked down on or controlled. Marital infidelity is also considered a form of psychological violence against a woman. Because the supposed role of a woman in marriage includes being a good and faithful wife, infidelity may make her feel that she has either little or no worth for her partner, lowering her self-esteem. So when we say marital infidelity, it is an act of cheating where a married person had a sexual intercourse with someone else. So when a woman experiences marital infidelity, it will lower her self-esteem because she would think less of herself, and she may think that whatever she does will never be enough. Third is economic abuse or violence. So economic abuse or violence is the deprivation of a woman's financial independence. This form of abuse can be realized through explicit acts such as denying women the right to use property or materials that are legally hers, destroying her things, solely controlling her money or property, or threatening to deprive her of financial support. More subtle forms of economic abuse involve the removal of support from one's partner, having her father, spouse, or relative disallow her from participating in the labor market, or stopping her from creating her own income-generating project. Fourth is sexual violence. It is defined as the forcing of unwanted sexual acts upon a person. It is not limited to the act of copulation. Any act that is sexual in nature can be considered sexual violence. Sexual violence ranges from rape, marital rape, incest, sexual abuse of children, to sexual objectification of women and children. Sexual violence include molestation and the attacking or unwanted touching of a woman's private parts. Other forms of sexual violence as defined by the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act of 2003 include forcing women or their children to watch pornography, look at sexually suggestive material, or do indecent acts. Rape is defined as forced or coerced penetration of the vulva or anus using a penis, other body parts, or an object. Rape is considered rape even if the penetration is minimal. Unsuccessful rape is called attempted rape. If more than one person commits rape on any one person, it is called gang rape. Assaulting other sexual organs can be considered sexual violence. The lack of consent is essential to sexual violence. So marital rape occurs only between married couple. This happens when the husband forces his wife to have sexual intercourse without consent. Incest refers to sexual acts done between family members or closely related persons. The root of incest comes from the violation of trust of a victim on his or her assailant.
Practices and sexual violence is forcing children to become child brides. Female genital mutilation also falls under this category because it specifically involves acts that harm a person's sexual organ. Child brides are unable to give consent because they are married off as children and do not fully understand the circumstances they are placed in due to lack of maturity or experience. These conditions also lead to numerous health issues such as STDs and early pregnancy. Female genital mutilation, also called female circumcision. It involves the cutting or removal of certain parts of a woman's external vagina. It is mostly carried out on girls 15 years and younger. Genital mutilation has no known medical benefit to females. In fact, women can be placed in grave danger due to massive bleeding and infection. They are also at risk of complication during pregnancy and childbirth. This tradition is still widely practiced because it is believed to keep women pure and clean before marriage. Sexual harassment is a specific form of sexual violence that occurs outside one's home. The sexual act may not necessarily be forced or take physical form. Manipulation, intimidation, and blackmail can be used to coerce someone into having sex or performing sexual acts. The Philippines Anti-Sexual Harassment Law of 1995 defines sexual harassment as the demand of a sexual act or favor in an institution, wherein the person who demands the act is in moral ascendancy or influence over the person being solicited. The UN's definition of sexual harassment qualifies possible acts that are not stated in our local Anti-Sexual Harassment Act. The UN Women Watch considers an act to be sexual harassment if it involves any unwelcome sexual advance, request for sexual favor, verbal or physical conduct or gestures, which is the movement or action of a sexual nature, or any other behavioral of a sexual nature that might reasonably be expected or be perceived to cause offense or humiliated to another. An act can be considered harassment if it creates a hostile woman and violence environment or interferes with work, a qualification shared by both the UN and Anti-Sexual Harassment Law of 1995. The UN Women watches a list of possible acts of sexual harassment. These include verbal, physical, and non-verbal incidents. Verbal incidents involve whistling at someone, catcalling, making sexual comments about a person's body, sex innuendos, turning work discussions into sexual conversations, telling sexual jokes or stories, asking about sexual fantasies, preferences, or history, asking personal questions about social or sexual life, making kissing sounds, hulling and smacking lips, making sexual comments about a person's clothing, anatomy or looks, repeatedly asking out a person who is not interested, and telling lies or spreading rumors about individual personal sex life. Nonverbal incidents include the following: staring or leering at someone, looking someone up and down, blocking one's path, following the person, stalking, unwanted gifts, gesturing sexually, licking one's lip, and throwing kisses. Physical harassment involves touching a person's hair or hugging, kissing, stroking, or patting a person's body, rubbing oneself sexually against a person, standing close, or brushing against a person. Sexual harassment is an issue because it is a form of gender-based violence which seriously inhibits women's ability to enjoy rights and freedom on a basis of equality with men. Violence against women in public spaces. We are very familiar with the word public sphere, which this is the open area for everyone that can be the place to happen in the situation related to violence against women. Street harassment is sexual harassment that occurs in a public space. The harassment may involve catcalls, shouting of sexual obscenities, unwanted sexual gestures, blocking a person's path, indecent exposure, grouping, and the like. Pornography, prostitution, sexual slavery, and sex trafficking. Pornography is defined as a representation through publication, exhibition, cinematography, indecent shows, information technology, or by whatever it means, of a person engaged in related explicit sexual activities or any representation of the sexual parts of a person for primarily sexual purposes. Pornography is a much contested debate in the feminist circle. Many feminists believe it to be liberating, especially for those who choose to do pornography to express their sexual liberties. It is also one of the root issues behind advertisement that uses women's body to sell items. These advertisements sexualize women and objectify them to sell a product. This practice becomes a problem when women are seen as props for someone's sexual fantasy and nothing else. Example in this advertisement is a woman wearing only a bikini who will endorse alcohol products that give impact to the audience or the viewer to be more attractive. This kind of strategy is adapted to get the attention of everyone to their selling products. Like pornography, prostitution involves the buying and selling of soul intercourse at sex-related activities. While there is the belief that women should be free to explore their sexuality, and that the sex industry is a valuable industry whose workers should be protected, the patriarchal world in which it exists does not create a safe environment for this type of work. Issues that are related to prostitution involve sex tourism, sexual exploitation, and sex slavery. Sex tourism is used as sexual services is a selling point for tourism in which a person may go to a specific location to experience sexual activities. Escort services are also considered forms of sex tourism. When a woman is compelled to enter this industry because of lack of options, exploitation occurs. Women who are deceived to entering the sex industry and cannot live on their own accord become that are considered sex slaves. An example of sexual slavery was the situation of the comfort women during World War II. Sex trafficking involves the relocation of women from one place to another without them knowing where they are going. These women often agree to go to these places because they have been promised employment by a legitimate employer.
Spiritual violence. Spiritual force is a form of violence against women that uses religion or spiritually to discredit, harm, or disempower them. It happens when powerful religious leaders use supposedly religious ideologies to control and rule over women. Women are limited to a specific role in the religion that may be against their free will. Part of this violence involves sexual abuse, such as when women are called to be sacrificed as virgin to the leader. These acts are forms of rape and sexual molestation, often seen cults that abuse and exhibit their members. Other forms of violence. Reproductive or medical abuse. Women may be forced to get pregnant, use contraceptives, or undergo abortions. Another form of is the withholding of information about safe pregnancy, contraceptives, and childbirth. Medical abuse include coercing women to undergo medical procedures such as removal of their uterus or forced tube ligation, the use of women in medical experiments without their consent, and or forced C-section on a pregnant woman who is willing and able to go through natural birthing methods. Abuse of women in intimate relationships. Women who are abused by their partners are called victims of intimate partner violence or abuse. It entails any form of violence or harm against a woman by her current or former partner, husband, or live-in partner. Domestic violence occurs within a home where an unequal power relationship between the victim and the perpetrator exists. An act of violence may also be considered domestic violence if it is committed by an adult male relative to a woman who may be older of the same age or younger than him. Children who witnesses or experience domestic violence are highly likely to perpetrate domestic violence as adults. Other possible effects include children with behavioral problems, children who end up in the streets, and children who are more likely to be trafficked. The impacts of violence against women. Violence against women influences how they participate in the public sphere. A woman is a victim of vow loses out of five of her health days because of abuse. The issues are not only personal but financial as well. The high cost in treating a victim of VAW are associated with physical treatment, therapy, shelters, training for advocates against VAW, and the prosecution of the perpetrators. Health consequences. Violence against women has long-term and short-term effects on women physically, emotionally, and sexually. It can lead to unwanted pregnancies, unwanted miscarriage, sexually transmitted disease, and other sexual and reproductive health issues. Women who experience VAW may develop mental health problems such as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, eating disorders, sleep disorders, and the like. The victims and witnesses of AWIR are equally at risk for mental health issues, anxiety, depressions, and low self-esteem. Laws on violence against women. The institutionalization of women's rights in the Philippines began in the post-martial law period. Equality is enshrined in the 1987 Constitution, and women are, in theory, protected from discrimination based on their gender. Before the inclusion of equality in the Constitution, sexual harassment was not recognized. The call for elimination of VOW came after the 1995 Beijing Platform for Action was passed, as this agenda saw VOW as an area of concern that needed to be addressed. These are the list of laws on violence against women. Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995, Anti-Mail Order Bride Law of 1990, Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act of Rape 2004, Rape Victim Assistance Act of 1998, Anti-Rape Act of 1997, Anti-Trafficking in Person Act of 2003. Fast facts, violence against women. Lower levels of education perpetuate vow or cause women to become victims of vow, specifically sexual violence. Witnessing family violence makes one prone to becoming both abuser or victim of vow. Women may become isolated because of vow. One may fail to participate in her everyday activities because of this violence. Women may develop mental health issues because of vow. Vow may result in the inability to work, which may lead to the loss of one's source of livelihood. A woman who experiences vow is prone to substance abuse. Fast facts. Intimate partner violence. Women who are in abusive relationship often have a past history of violence. Those who perpetrate sexual violence hold high value for family honor and sexual purity. They believe in male sexual entitlement, the unequal position of women relative to men, and normative use of violence to resolve conflict are strongly associated with both intimate partner violence and non-partner sexual violence. Prevention and response. Laws against violence against women, if properly enforced, can become powerful tools against these pervading societal issues of violence. To address fully the consequences of violence and the needs of victims or survivors, all sectors of society must condemn vow in all forms. More research in culture and content-specific vow can help address this form of violence, which may depend on one's local. Different agencies should respond properly in educating people about vow, its cost, and its effects on one's health. Supporting national efforts and groups that handle vow cases and care for victims can help tackle the issues at its root. Three things are to be considered when looking at the cause of violence against women. One, personal experience. One can view violence against women based on his or her behavior in relationships as well as the actual relationships between the victim and the perpetrator. One, context, and one's culture and society.